From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. And ahead for you today, an extended cattle market segment featuring Katelyn McCullock from the Livestock Marketing Information Center. Katelyn will go over what she considers the 5 keys to the cattle market trends over the next 6 months, 3 of which revolve around the uncertainty over where feed grain costs are headed. Included in the discussion, the LMIC's forecasts for calf prices this fall and cull cow prices, the latter having implications for the nation's cattle inventory. Further ahead this week's 4-H segment, Jeff Wickman talks with K-State's Sarah Keatley as they look ahead to some of the 4-H youth events and activities at the upcoming Kansas State Fair. Plus more for you here on Agriculture Today.
Agriculture and food systems are the main drivers of the Kansas economy, but must be improved in order to feed the world's growing population. How are we going to do so? Reduce food loss, find ways to preserve grasslands, and help families stretch their dollars. Global food systems is one of the 5 grand challenges K-State Research and Extension is addressing. To learn more, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
Today's broadcast opens up on the cattle markets, and for insight, we turn now to the director of the Livestock Marketing Information Center in Denver, Katelyn McCullock. What Katelyn's done is put together some thoughts on what she's calling the 5 keys to the cattle markets over the next half year or so, and some insightful things that we'll cover today with her. But Katelyn, looking briefly now back at last week's trade, fed and feeder cattle prices, very modest movement at the most, and something of a mixed bag there.
The fed cattle market traded at 111 this week, which is about $1 lower than last week. We saw some uptick in some of the feeder cattle markets, particularly at 700 to 800 pounds. They were up about $4.50 from the week before. 500 to 600 pound weights, also in the Southern Plains, traded about $2 higher than the week before, and then lightweight calves were slightly lower this week. But one of probably the bigger excitements has been watching the Choice Select spread. That's holding steady, still at a $20 per hundredweight spread on the board. Choice for the average for the week did not move a whole lot from the previous week, but still you're looking at nearly $24 between the Choice box beef cutout and that Select cutout.
So when we look at the Choice to Select spread and that margin there, how do you interpret that? What's that saying to the market at the moment?
Well, we're attributing a lot of it to be the decline in the availability of choice beef, which is probably indicative of feedlots being very current. We're not seeing a lot of animals kept on feed longer, which is bringing that percentage of grading choice down. And I think that's really what's helping prop up those choice box beef values.
Let's get right into, though, today for the bulk of our time, again, what you're calling the 5 keys to the next 6 months for the cattle market. And you've broken these down and detailed these. And one of the things you say that the market is really going to keep honing in on here in 2 different ways, feed grain supplies that may be coming out of this year's crop. For one thing, we're still uncertain about how much corn acreage is out there, Katelyn.
This has been a really interesting year in that we don't have a very clear picture of what feed grains really look like, and it's pretty late in the season. Now, typically by this time, we have a very good idea of what corn acres we were looking at. We might be talking about yield. This year, it still remains very up in the air. It's highly variable across the country. We see reports all the time where fields are very close together, and some of them weren't able to be planted, and some of them look pretty great. Now, on the corn acre side, which is what I'm going to focus on today, NASS is reserving crop farmers this year. So the June acreage report that came out at the end of June didn't have quite enough information in it at that time because planting was so late that they're going to resurvey to see how much actually was planted. Now, one of the keys to that is that we'll know then a better idea of what was planted, but we won't know how many of those acres shifted to soybeans or prevented plant at that time. Mm-hmm. Now, prevented plant has a couple different things. It can remain fallow. There are some other cover crops that can be planted under those programs. That's largely specific to different regions, depending on the program and what kind of rules they have to follow. And so it leaves a lot up in the air. Now, when we think about what corn for grain was last year, that was somewhere close to 89 million acres. We're forecasting that when all is said and done, corn acres for grain will probably be at least 1 million acres short of that. But it could be potentially significantly lower for those things that I outlined. Crop planting was extremely late. It was extremely wet. We're still waiting for that number to see exactly where that corn acreage number sorts out. But all in all, I think everyone is thinking that it's definitely going to be below a year ago. The question is how much.
And you're also interested in what has happened with some of those prevented planting acres out there. Some of those might well have gone into another feedstuff, silage in particular, and that will, in fact, play into the markets, the cattle markets, to some extent, will it not?
Silage is going to be a key here. I think it's going to determine, even if corn for grain moves more expensive, silage could be a relatively cheap commodity. Mm-hmm. There's a couple options. If folks did plant corn for silage, that would be an opportunity potentially for cattle. It doesn't have a lot of other avenues. You're going to feed probably cattle or sheep, and in most of the country, that's probably going to be cattle. Mm-hmm. Pasture and range conditions have maintained fairly well this summer, and so the forage availability in general has been really decent, even if dry hay stocks haven't come back up. And so we have a little bit of the economy going on here between how short we're going to be in corn acres and the potential to have actually a very excellent forage year.
And another of your keys in this list, well, staying on the feed grain subject, and that is what kind of corn yield we may see to attach to whatever acres we eventually arrive at through the USDA. Given how late a great deal of this corn was planted, that yield potential is, again, one of those uncertainties, Katelyn.
Corn yield related to late plantings is expected to have some drag. Last year we were in the neighborhood of 176 bushels per acre. I think late planting, probably it's difficult right now to tease out how much of late planting versus very wet even after planting, cold temperatures, all that stacking up against this crop right now. In the month of July, we were talking about some corn showing 5 to 6 weeks behind. But we've seen several growing days produce warm temperatures, which it's my understanding that the corn crop in several areas of the country has caught up and is probably looking at more like 2 weeks behind at that point. But again, this is very variable. When you drive across the country, you have very spotty fields where some of the corn looks excellent. You have some of the corn that looks excellent but is definitely far behind. And then you have corn that is really struggling. And so it's really hard to put that picture together on a national average basis. The other thing you got to be concerned about is that with late planting, you also need to think about what's going to happen if there's an early frost. Mm-hmm. So some of the crop progress numbers that come out, I'm not sure if they fully take into account whether a crop just looks good or it looks good for the time of year it should, meaning does it take into account that weeks behind timeline? So this really adds to the uncertainty of yield. You get into that early frost, you're probably looking at lots of those acres that were planted for grain either getting tilled under or they possibly could be cut for more silage. Now, that obviously adds to that silage picture of having maybe an increased amount of forage. I think probably most of the corn is catching up at a rate that you might not have that problem. But early frost may not have to be that early if the corn is that far behind. And so that's something to keep in mind as well.
Well, when you put all of that together, the potential for corn prices going higher definitely exists. We'll see how the numbers shake out. If that were to occur, though, and this is your third key, Katelyn, we could see pressure brought to bear on both calf and feeder cattle prices. So
the culmination of all of these thoughts that I have is that probably corn has the chance to move higher than it is today. So the futures market for December corn closed at $4.09 per bushel, and so that's taking into account some yield and acreage consideration. However, I think where we're at, where the LMIC is at currently, we're somewhere closer to the 450 range, and that really takes into account probably some significant more yield drag than the market has on it right now, which includes that potential for early frost. Our acreage is like I said, probably in the 1 million to 1.5 million below what the acreage was last year, and that also is factoring in. Now, if you take both of those pieces of information, what we translate that to mean is that calf and feeder prices are likely going to be lower this fall because feed costs are going to be higher. Mm-hmm. Now, that sets aside, right, that potential for high volumes of forage at cheap rates. So if you just think about what's going to happen with corn for grain, you're probably looking at calf prices being about $10 a hundredweight lower, and that's banking on probably about a 50-cent appreciation in that December futures price. Now, updating, obviously, these all have caveats. The picture can change. We'll know more in a couple weeks when acreage gets updated and we show more information regarding the yield. But again, that crop progress probably isn't a good enough indicator at this point as to what corn yield's going to be. And so this could largely be up in the air right up until fall. Mm-hmm. Now, I think it's important to keep in mind to be a little nimble this year and watch that market. We're predicting heavier feeders being down about $5 a hundredweight this fall, heading into the spring quarter, probably more similar to a year ago. But we're also factoring in on both of those a slightly smaller calf crop, which was announced in the July 1 inventory. And we think that should still offer some support to the calf market. But I still fully expect that calf market, at least in the fall and early spring, to be driven by feed costs with limited potential for upside at this point.
Now, there are other considerations that add to this picture. They make up the balance of your 5 keys to the next 6 months, affecting our cattle producers out there. Katelyn, we'll get into those after this quick break, if you'd stand by.
Okay.
Along with us, the director of the Livestock Marketing Information Center, Katelyn McCullock. We'll hear more from Katelyn here on the K-State Radio Network. You are tuned to Agriculture Today. For 25 years, K-State Research and Extension's Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services has been providing a no-cost, confidential place to call in and visit with an agricultural lawyer. Our experts are available to help you producers handle legal and financial issues. Explore your options and generate solutions. Call us at 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. We're back now on Agriculture Today and with an extended version of our weekly cattle market segment. Our guest once more has put together what she considers the 5 keys to the cattle market trends over the next 6 months. Again, welcoming back in Katelyn McCullock, the director of the Livestock Marketing Information Center, joining us from her office in Denver. Now, the next key on your list, Katelyn, the state of the macro economy and how that resonates in as far as domestic beef demand. And there are several things in motion under that particular heading, Katelyn.
So the Federal Reserve announced that they would cut interest rates by 0.25% last week. But we also got the latest estimate for GDP, with the first quarter showing it was up 3.1%, and the first estimate for the second quarter that was released is up 2.1%. So you have a couple different factors. So GDP is still showing fairly strong growth in the U.S. economy. With the Federal Reserve cutting interest rates, that points to some hesitation on their end about where the macroeconomy is going. I think the macroeconomy has a much longer-term implication for the beef industry and is probably one of the bigger risks in this cattle cycle, moving from what we're currently predicting is a stable to slow decline over the next year into a much faster liquidation process. And that would be because, beef demand might fall off. We might see less exports if the global economy really starts to contract. Now, beef in cold storage has continued to drop, and ground prices have been surprisingly stable given the above-average cow slaughter. So some of these things point to beef demand still good. We seem to be working through cold storage fairly effectively and not letting these increased production levels hang around for very long. Many of the wholesale cuts at this point are registering below a year ago, but we do seem to be moving quite a bit in terms of volume of product, which should help support cattle prices a little bit further down the line. Not having that build up in cold storage and continuing to move product, all are good things when we talk about what if the macroeconomy slumps a little bit. Doubling down on that would be if you saw a lot of that ending up in cold storage, and that would add to the weakness in the overall complex.
There's yet another factor that lends to the inventory question, and that would be cull cow marketing. And you bring up that market, those prices have had a pretty rough go as we head into the late summer and early fall.
I think some would call it brutally low cull cow prices, and that could play a role again this year. Last year we saw prices remain very low relative to a year ago and relative to the previous half of the year, and that could also play a role this year and shape the outcome of cattle prices next year. Now, if we remain low, and we have seen a little bit of uptick, but we've really remained, in the Southern Plains at least, between that $40 and $50 per hundredweight range, if they remain low, producers are more likely to hold them, particularly if we still have really good grass and forage conditions. You think back to if those pasture conditions hold, if there's a lot of silage, is there the possibility of having extra forage on hand where you could hold those cows and hope for a better price moving into spring fairly inexpensively? I think that could potentially be part of the key here. Now, if that happens and enough of the country is in that situation, maybe we don't see a decline in the January 1 cow numbers as we're currently predicting now. Now, we do have cull cow prices showing over a year ago this fall, but remember, those were close to $40 a hundredweight, and so how much higher they are, I think, is still to be determined. So it could play as potentially a pretty big role in where we see the cattle cycle move here and how inexpensive really feed is.
It's going to be intriguing to watch that part of the supply equation out there, the inventories, as we head into 2020. But the umbrella term that applies to about everything regarding agricultural markets, Katelyn, most assuredly the cattle trade included, this element of uncertainty at multiple levels. And it's pretty much inescapable and doesn't really help to clear the picture any for producers and other market interests.
Yes, uncertainty is probably, if there's one key word, that's what it is uncertainty. There's a lot of moving parts this year that are still up in the air that I actually don't see sorting themselves out very quickly. And so that maybe as a manager becomes a little bit harder to manage because you need to probably be looking at it a little bit more often and try and position yourself to be as nimble as possible. As I mentioned before, usually the feed picture is a whole lot clearer at this point, and we can say with greater certainty what's going to happen to the fall prices on the calf and feeder side. But right now I would say if you're offered a price close to last year, you might want to think about taking it because we're predicting prices to be quite a bit lower.
So be ready to manage your risk accordingly and be aware of any changes that come along as a cattle producer. That's prudent advice. And we would point out here, Katelyn, that the kinds of information that you've shared with us right here, including the various forecasts that the LMIC makes on market factors, are covered fully at your website, and it is updated routinely. That is, producers at lmic.info. Check that out, lmic.info. Katelyn, we appreciate your perspectives. We'll catch up with you again in the not-too-distant future. Many thanks.
Okay. I appreciate it, Eric.
Katelyn McCullock with us. She is the director of the Livestock Marketing Information Center. It's based in Denver. Once again, that is a center co-sponsored by K-State and numerous other land-grant universities. Well, we do have a few moments ahead of the break, so we will take this opportunity to give you the full rundown on that trio of Kansas Livestock Association K-State Ranch Management Field Days. They are coming up quite soon now through this month of August. There are 3 different programs at each of these 3 sites, and the first of the 3 is something a bit out of the ordinary for this series. It'll take place at High Plains Ponderosa Dairy, near the city of Plains in southwest Kansas. It is set for a week from tomorrow, Tuesday, August the 13th. The High Plains Ponderosa Dairy, jointly owned by Kansas and Wisconsin families with a long history in the farming, ranching, and dairy businesses. On that program, K-State's A.J. Tarpoff will look at external parasite management for cattle operations. Then the manager of the Cattle Trace program, K-State's Cassie Kniebel, will have an update on Cattle Trace, what you need to know as that animal disease traceability initiative progresses. And the general manager of High Plains Ponderosa Dairy, Greg Bethert, will round out the program. He'll discuss the growing priority of consumer perception. He brings up the question, as consumers and lawmakers become more curious about where their food comes from, how do we as cattle producers responsibly respond? Greg will discuss the challenges surrounding that question and potential solutions to ensure the longevity of the cattle industry. Again, the first of the field days at High Plains Ponderosa Dairy near Plains in southwest Kansas on Tuesday, August the 13th. Then 2 days later, the next ranch management field day. This will be in the heart of the Flint Hills at Moyer Farms, LLC, just north of Emporia, Thursday, August the 15th. Jarrett and Shauna Moyer have been running a stalker and backgrounder operation for several years now. On that program, Lyon County Extension Agricultural Agent Brian Reese will talk about identifying and understanding Old World bluestem in the Flint Hills. Brian will explain the issues surrounding Old World bluestem and will discuss various ways of coping with that invasive plant. Then K-State's Dale Blassie on exploring possible economic advantages of using drones in livestock production. He'll talk about potential everyday uses on the ranch, and he will cover the basics of drone use with a short flight demonstration on site. And once more from Cattle Trace, Cassie Kniebel with an update on the program. That's the second ranch management field day on Thursday, August the 15th at Moyer Farms, LLC, again just north of Emporia in Lyon County. And the last of the K-State KLA ranch management field days has been scheduled now for August the 22nd, a Thursday. This will take place in Russell County at Rusty Acres, an operation owned by Lyman and Rosemary Nuss. It's a fourth-generation farming and commercial cow-calf operation near Dorrance. On this program from the Kansas Department of Agriculture, Animal Health Planner Emily Voris will talk about how you cattle producers can get involved in the Secure Beef Supply Plan. Once more, K-State's Cassie Kniebel on the program as well with an update on Cattle Trace. Also, K-State's Keith Harmony with suggestions on controlling locust trees and yucca plants, and K-State's Walt Fick outlining the issues surrounding Old World bluestem. Again, that field day at Rusty Acres, just outside of Dorrance in Russell County, on Thursday, August the 22nd. Each of these field days begins with registration at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The programs themselves get rolling at 3:30, and there will be the complimentary beef dinner right around 6:45. That's the series of Kansas Livestock Association K-State Ranch Management Field Days coming up over the next couple of weeks. To find out more, including the directions to each of the field day sites, go to kla.org. Again, kla.org. This is Agriculture Today, and we'll return shortly with more.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
Broadcasting from the campus of Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Over now to today's agricultural news page, and these headlines, courtesy in part of DTN. President Trump and European Union officials signed an agreement on Friday at the White House that will nearly triple the volume of duty-free beef exports to Europe over time. The USDA's Rod Bain has more.
This is a tremendous victory for American farmers, ranchers, and, of course, European consumers.
President Donald Trump with a Friday announcement that the U.S. and European Union reached an agreement that is expected to nearly triple annual duty-free exports of our nation's beef to the EU marketplace over the next 7 years.
In year one, duty-free American beef exports to the EU will increase by 46%. Over 7 years, they will increase by another 90%.
U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer, Agriculture Deputy Secretary Stephen Sensky, and representatives from the beef and meat export sectors joined the president, along with European Union representatives, for the agreement signing ceremony at the White House. Ambassador Lighthizer says regarding U.S. beef exports to the European Union,
initial estimates indicate that U.S. beef will grow by over $270 million a year once the agreement is fully implemented.
I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Now, Europe and the U.S. have battled over hormones in beef since the late 1980s, which included a case before the World Trade Organization that the U.S. won, but the European Union failed to abide by. The EU then pushed for another WTO case against retaliatory measures put in place by the U.S. and Canada because the EU would not recognize science that made Europe's ban on hormone treatments unjustifiable. The U.S. exported $8.3 billion in beef in 2018, of which the European Union accounted for roughly 3.5% of foreign sales. For the first 5 months of this year, sales to the EU have totaled $80.5 million, down about 10% in value from last year. That's according to USDA data. Senator Pat Roberts of Kansas, the chairman of the Senate Agriculture Committee, applauded Friday's announcement in a statement. He said, quoting here, "This agreement will provide some relief to American ranchers during an uncertain trading atmosphere." He said he looks forward to the upcoming EU Parliament to seal the deal via its vote. The value of U.S. agricultural exports, meantime, fell in the month of June compared with May, but it was enough to bring back a trade surplus as the value of U.S. agricultural imports fell by nearly $1 billion. U.S. ag exports valued at $10.79 billion in June. That was down from $11.4 billion in May. The smallest value for U.S. agricultural exports registered so far in the fiscal year 2019, and the first month so far in fiscal 19. That U.S. agricultural exports have not been $11 billion or more. U.S. agricultural imports were valued at $10.6 billion, down from $11.6 billion in May. That fits with the historical patterns when the value of imports often has declined from May to June. Now, the result of the shifts brought back a trade surplus for U.S. agriculture of $176 million. That after 2 straight months of trade deficits, including the record mark of $865 million in a deficit in April. It also marked the 7 straight months, that is, where the difference between U.S. agricultural exports and imports has been at a deficit or has been less than $1 billion. And as the EPA continues work on a new Waters of the U.S. rule definition, the new bill introduced in the U.S. Senate last week would codify that definition into federal law. If the bill introduced by Senators Joni Ernst of Iowa and Mike Braun of Indiana becomes law, it would ensure that if a new administration takes office, the rule could not be changed by executive order or regulatory action. The EPA is on track to finalize the new definition by later this year. In addition to making the definition part of the federal law, not just federal regulation, the bill would include deadlines for when property owners can expect to receive jurisdictional determination on waters in question. This legislation would also provide protection to landowners, namely, if a landowner had received a determination that a water in question is not navigable, that decision would be binding for as long as a landowner has a legal interest in that property. Next up for you on Agriculture Today, the weekly feature from the Kansas Forest Service here at K-State, Tree Tales, and awaiting with it this time around is K-State Forester Ryan Armbruster. Ryan?
If we have learned anything from weather in recent years, it's that rainfall, either too much or too little, plays a major role in determining whether our trees grow vigorously or whether they suffer and decline. Well, an unusually wet winter and spring did much to replenish subsurface soil moisture across Kansas and banish all classes of drought from our map. The hot, dry winds of summer have begun to take their toll on trees, especially young trees. Water use in trees is driven by a number of factors, including species, size of the tree, time of year, time of day, temperature, wind speed, relative humidity, and site factors such as soil type, exposure to winds, shading, and mulching. It's difficult to accurately estimate just how much water or how often a tree needs water given all these factors. But there are some useful rules of thumb that can be used to help determine how to efficiently irrigate to benefit your trees. Most of the fine roots that absorb water are within the top 1 to 2 feet of soil, extending out to 1 or 2 times the drip line of the tree. You can use a soil probe, such as a long screwdriver or an electric fence post, to see if the soil is dry. Dry soil is much harder to penetrate than moist soil, so if your probe meets a lot of resistance, it might be time to give your tree a nice, deep watering. But how much water to apply? In terms of gallons, a common rule of thumb is that a tree would benefit from a weekly watering of 10 gallons per inch of trunk diameter. Another estimate is to provide about a gallon per foot of height. Controlling weeds and grass that compete for water and applying 2 to 4 inches of coarse wood mulch will also ensure that most of the water you apply goes to the tree, instead of being lost to weeds and evaporation. Perhaps no other single practice is as beneficial to tree health as maintaining a healthy root zone through proper mulching. Even established trees will benefit from supplemental watering during dry spells, which will do much to restore and maintain vigor to your trees. An ounce of prevention may be worth a pound of cure, and a little care taken now to limit water stress is worth a great deal when it comes to your tree's overall health. This is Ryan Armbruster, Forest Health Specialist with the Kansas Forest Service, and this has been another Tree Tale.
All right, Ryan, many thanks. Jeff Wickman is standing by with this week's 4-H segment for you. That's next on Agriculture Today.
Did you eat today? Thank a farmer. A way to get more involved in agriculture is through 4-H and FFA. Through 4-H and FFA, we have been given multiple opportunities to grow as leaders and learn more about agriculture.
You can learn skills related to jobs, public speaking skills, and you get the opportunity to travel around the country and meet new people.
If you want more information about getting more involved in 4-H and FFA, visit them on their websites at kansasffa.org and kansas4h.org.
This is Agriculture Today. I'm Jeff Wickman. As county fair season winds down, many Kansas 4-H youth are looking forward to taking their projects and animals to the Kansas State Fair in September. Kansas 4-H Events Coordinator Sarah Keatley previews some of the events taking place for 4-H youth on the first and second weekends of the State Fair. Sarah, one of the things that Kansas 4-H youth look forward to is the State Fair, and it is really not that far away, rapidly approaching September 6th through the 15th, of course, in Hutchinson. And there are a number of exhibits and a number of things going on. So an opportunity today to just kind of talk about some of the things going on the first weekend and then the second weekend.
Absolutely. So all of our exhibits come in on Friday, September 6th. So those are all of our static exhibits that are inside of 4-H Centennial Hall. Those come in from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., and judging happens throughout the day. You can watch some of that judging happen throughout the building during the day. At 5:15 on Friday, September 6th, is our IFFE 4-H food sale. So all of the food that is not displayed but was awarded a ribbon at the food judging is then sold to benefit the International Foreign Youth Exchange program through 4-H. And so they have that sale from 5:15 to 8 p.m. that night, so the items go fast. So if there's something that you want, if there's a cake or a pie that you know that a 4-H'er brought, it would be in your best interest to be there at 5:15 when they start taking money and they start selling the foods. After Friday, we open up again on 8 a.m. on Saturday morning, and all of our exhibits are on display that day. They do start the photography judging on Saturday, and that, if you have not seen the photography judging happen, it is a sight to see. There are 3 judges who all score the same photograph, and then those scores are added together to give them a certain ribbon color. And so that process is just a very educational, hands-on process that 4-H'ers, volunteers, and fairgoers in general can come and see.
Great way to see how things are judged, to kind of see if you're in line with what the judges think.
Absolutely. It's a chance for you to judge it in your mind and then see how the judges judge it as well.
And they put the ribbons on as they judge, so you will start to see more and more ribbons as the fair goes on.
So all of our exhibits in 4-H Centennial Hall are judged on Friday. They will all have ribbon stickers on them to let the general public know how they did. Then the ribbons we actually give to the counties, and then they give those to the 4-H'ers so that the exhibits can really be on display and you can see the attention is given to the exhibits.
And I think you were telling me before we started that almost 10,000 exhibits in Centennial Hall?
Yeah, we have just under 10,000 exhibits that come in through Centennial Hall that are displayed, from foods to photography, entomology, clothing, visual arts. So we really cover the gamut.
What are some of the other things that we'll see then that first weekend?
So during the first weekend, we have 4-H presentations. Those are happening on both Saturday and Sunday. We will have 2 stages running of those inside of Centennial Hall. And so we'll have judges listening to demonstrations, illustrated talks, project talks given by 4-Hers. Then we also have our photography judging contest that first weekend, our poultry show, as well as all of the livestock events, which are over in the livestock barns, and that's when the grand drive happens on Saturday night.
And then there's more on this second weekend.
There is. So beginning on Thursday, we start with the horse show. And so we have 4-Hers from across the state checking in horses beginning Thursday morning, and that show starts Thursday afternoon and continues to Friday and then even Saturday. And also on the second weekend, we have our rabbit show. So we have hundreds of rabbits that are in the rabbit barn, and you have 4-Hers volunteering and helping transport those rabbits from their cages to the judging table and back again, and making sure that those rabbits are all being evaluated too.
And they're really cute, and we want to pet them, we want to touch them, but what are some things that people should and should not do?
Right. So when you're in the rabbit barn, do not put your fingers in the rabbit cages. Rabbits are curious animals. They will nibble, they will bite. So definitely don't put your hands in the cages. If there's a rabbit that you see a 4-Her carrying around, it would be appropriate to ask that 4-Her if it would be okay to pet that rabbit. And if it's theirs, they, by all means, will most likely let you do that.
That's really kind of a learning experience for not only the public, but for the 4-Hers too, because they have that chance to actually interact with people and talk a little bit about whatever it is that they're working on. They're happy to share that information.
Yeah, so all of our 4-Hers, 9 to 18 at the State Fair, are so knowledgeable about their different project areas that they have. If you ask them how they sewed a garment or how they collected their insects for their entomology box, these 4-Hers will be able to tell you everything from beginning to end. It's kind of mind-blowing when you actually stop and think about the skills, the life skills, the talents that these 4-Hers have. They
may not give you their secret recipe, though, for cupcakes and some pies and things like that. Some secrets you have to keep, right?
Some secrets, they are kept in a recipe box hidden deep inside a cabinet.
This is something that is really, I guess really, it is the highlight of the year for these 4-Hers, and I know that they're excited to find out how their projects are going to rank, how they're going to be judged. But it's also a learning experience, even if they don't get the ribbon they were looking for.
Absolutely, it is. And you can actually check results live. Those are updated every 15 minutes, and you can find those by going to kansas4h.org. We'll start posting those results about mid-morning on Friday once some of our entries have started to be judged.
Most 4-Hers then will end up at some point going to the state fair?
That's really up to the individual and their family. A lot of the counties bring their exhibits into the state fair. So if you are exhibiting at the state fair, you'll want to check with your local extension agent, see what their plans are for getting projects down from your county or your district down to Hutchinson, Kansas. And then we love to have 4-Hers stop by, see their projects, take a picture with their project.
So this is a really busy time for not only the extension agents, it's also a busy time for the 4-H staff.
It is. They will come down, they will bring their projects down, and a lot of our staff volunteer. Like you said, we have about 10,000 exhibits and entries come into the state fair, and we would not be able to display, judge, evaluate, and get all of that done without the volunteers and the extension staff who come and help us. We have about 500 or 600 staff members who give their time throughout the entire Kansas State Fair.
So this is an opportunity to really go out and support the youth, support the state in general, because it's a big moneymaker for the state as well, but something that really, if you have not done the state fair, something that you should consider doing.
Absolutely, absolutely. And if you want to just come and get an idea and see what it's like at the state fair, come this year. If you want to volunteer, check with your local extension office and sign up to volunteer. You can help in any of our project areas. We will not turn volunteers away, and so we always enjoy seeing new faces and those familiar faces each year.
And again, if you want to get those updates, how do they find that information online?
You'll want to find those online at kansas4h.org. Again, that's kansas4h.org.
And, of course, they can go there just to learn more about all of the programs and activities that are offered through 4-H.
Absolutely. You sure can. And you can, from there, find some local extension programs that are in your area.
That's Kansas 4-H Events Coordinator Sarah Keatley. The Kansas State Fair begins September 6th and runs through the 15th in Hutchinson. For additional information, go to kansasstatefair.com. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.